Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode.
Well, friends, thank you again for joining us for another episode on the Kingdoms Podcast. I'm really grateful to be recording this in Barrie, Ontario, but in conversation with a pastor that I've really grown to value and respect for his teaching and writing, who's all the way in Nashville, Tennessee, Scott Sauls. Scott, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be with you.
Well, we're looking forward to a lot of what we're going to dive into, but wanted to start by looking a little bit at your history and your experience as a pastor in ministry. And I know that before you moved to Nashville, where you currently serve as the senior pastor at Christ Presbyterian Church, you worked in New York City alongside Tim Keller, which, unless one of our listeners is living under a rock, everyone has heard of and many people have been influenced by. And just would love to hear how have some of the habits, the qualities, the disciplines that Keller embodied and that you were able to rub up against, if you will, in your time serving with him. How did those shape you and who you are as a person and as a pastor today?
Sure. Well, I think initially, Tim had a shaping influence on me long before we had met. I'd actually, with my wife, planted a couple of churches in the Midwestern United States, one in Kansas City and then another one in St. Louis, Missouri. And during that time had, been introduced to Tim's sermons and his writing, and just was taken by the comprehensiveness of the vision that he and Redeemer under his leadership were putting forth in a city such as New York, and was struck by the biblical fidelity, as well as the centrality of Christ and the gospel and grace in everything, combined with a compelling and multifaceted way of reaching our city through faith and work integration, and through engagement with those the Bible calls the least of these, with mercy and justice toward the poor and such, with having a robust public faith to be able to, faithfully represent and thoughtfully represent the gospel in public conversations, and then a zeal for getting more churches planted and off the ground and well supported. And so that vision was just very compelling, and it felt actually very complete in terms of the kind of pastor that I desired to be. And so just took a lot of ideas from Redeemer, and to my surprise, Redeemer took notice of some of the things that we were doing in St. Louis and got a phone call and asked if I had any interest in considering coming and joining the team there. And long and the short of it is, we did join that team, and I became a preaching pastor at Redeemer, and also had a hand in the small groups ministry there, and was a congregational pastor of West Side congregation there for a while. And so then out of the blue, we got the call to come to Nashville, and we look back in retrospect, and we didn't really plan on ever leaving New York. We loved it there so much, and yet it just seemed like something that we were being called to do, was to leave and to take what we'd learned there and sort of recontextualize it into a new environment where, Nashville, Tennessee, I don't know how much your listeners know about Nashville, but it's it's become sort of looped into the love affair between Los Angeles and New York. They call it the third coast in both LA and New York because of all the, I guess a lot of people just move between our three cities and relocate due to the overlapping industries and things like that. And so it's just been fun to be here. But the things I learned most about or from Tim, though, ended up being the more private things. Being able to serve together for about 5 years, just a deep man of prayer, very humble, even though I think he's the only pastor that ever made it onto Forbes' top 50 most influential people in the world list. Wow. But it never, things like that just didn't go to his head. And he was just a humble, simple, faithful guy through and through, with a committed marriage and reads through the Psalms every month of his life, reads through the whole Bible every year of his life, and has been for doing that for decades. You want to know how to become Tim Keller? Read the Bible every day for your entire life, and some of that will rub off on you. But yeah, remarkable guy. Also very shy, and which is, some people have a hard time imagining that preachers are shy, but turns out a lot of the very best preachers are fiercely introverted, and Tim would be among those. And so just endearing in a lot of ways.
Now, you spoke a bit of the shift from New York City to Nashville. And as much as, the gospel is the gospel in both of those cities, what are some specific strategies that you currently use to communicate the gospel? And how is that different, in that post-Christian New York setting to your current setting that is maybe a bit more of a Bible Belt, a bit more, it's assumed that people are Christian in that context?
It used to be assumed that. The buckle of the Bible Belt shifted probably about a decade ago from Nashville to cities like Birmingham and Chattanooga. And Nashville is actually on a rapid pace toward secularizing and becoming post-Christian as a city, largely because of the migration from the coasts, from cities like New York and LA and San Francisco and Seattle and Washington, D.C. and Boston and so on. And so the composition of our city is changing between Davidson and Williamson County, which are the two closest counties to the city of Nashville. Nashville being in Davidson County, but Davidson and Williamson are kind of the center of Middle Tennessee and considered Nashville proper. So there's 200 new people every single day that move here.
Wow.
And so the dynamics are changing as people bring their cultures from other places to this city. Amazon chose Nashville over New York, over a lot of other major cities to put their next hub. And the building has been built, and then the pandemic happened. And so as soon as the pandemic fades, that building will be populated with several thousand new Amazon employees. And that's just a small piece of what's going on here. It's not just country music anymore that's here, rock and roll, folk, singers, songwriters, all of it, robust film and theater, and the arts and entertainment are becoming very multifaceted here. 3 major universities between Vanderbilt, Belmont, and Lipscomb, and state government is here. And Nashville is called the Silicon Valley of healthcare. It's sort of the center of the world for healthcare research. A lot of we owe a lot of the fact that there are vaccines out there to research that's happened in our city, among other cities. And so there's just a lot going on here that resembles where we came from, and we've actually found it to be a lot more similar than different. Besides being in our cars as opposed to on our feet all the time, which is something we miss about New York. But yeah, it's a great city. You guys should come hang out here sometime.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, yeah. You know what? I can't speak for Matt. My wife and I were able to stop into Nashville for a few days on the way to and from Florida a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it just like, there's something magnetic about the culture there. We got into the Bluebird Cafe for
Oh,
an
wow.
evening show, and
That's not easy to do.
yeah, we stood in line for 3 hours
Uh-huh.
for the at the door tickets. So, but I was shopping last week, and a song by Lee Nash came on, and she was live at the Bluebird when I was there
Yeah.
3 years ago. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is it, like Nashville.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
But hey, circling back to what you just said about being a minister in Nashville, being in tune with that culture. I've really appreciated, I know for myself, being formed by some of your writing, Scott, and a book I recently read by you is Irresistible Faith, Becoming the Kind of Christian the World Can't Resist, which is something I think that appeals to a lot of Christians, but then wanting to functionally put that in together into practical living sometimes can be a challenging step.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the quotes that stood out from me in that, it says, to be on the side of Jesus is to be on the side of the world and its flourishing. And so I wonder, could you unpack that for us a little bit when we think about how to live that way in the world?
Well, I think it, again, like everything, starts with Christ, who he is and what his disposition is toward whatever or whomever we're talking about. And we know from scripture that he so loved the world. He didn't so love worldliness, but he so loved the world. He created the world. When he created it, he declared it to be very good. God was pleased at what he had made. He was pleased at who he had made, having made Adam and Eve and us in the image of God. And so, that's the baseline. That's the starting point, that Christ's own heart and disposition toward the world is one of love and one of desire to redeem what's been broken and to bring the impact of his saving love and saving grace, as we sing at Christmas time, as far as the curse is found, he comes to make his blessings flow. And so that has implications for how Christians engage the world. I think one of the best pictures of what it looks like to live as Christians in the world is to go back, all the way back to the early church, and to consider how the early church, even in a climate that was hostile toward Christianity, which we don't really know what that's like in the West. We think we do. We think we do because we're losing some of our privileges, and we're losing some of our comforts and our inconveniences, and we think that's persecution, and we act like the sky is falling, and maybe it is persecution on a mild level. But as far as I know, no Christian in Canada or the United States has ever had their life threatened because of their faith, or has had somebody execute them with the sanctioning of the state because they were Christians. And so until we're there, which I think will be a long time, if ever, we will never know persecution like they did in biblical times. What we know is the loss of privilege and the loss of conveniences and comforts, which we sometimes mistakenly think is persecution to first century levels. And so in that context of persecution, though, one of the main teachings of Jesus was to love your enemies, and what they did was they outloved Rome. They were more life-giving to Rome's vulnerable populations, especially during the plagues. When children were orphaned, when widows had no way of providing them for themselves except through prostitution, when people were down and out, when they were poor and unemployed, and they weren't receiving adequate assistance from the Roman state. Christians stepped in and they adopted orphans, and they took in the widows, and they tended to the sick. And by the 3rd century AD, without any assistance or partnership or encouragement or endorsement from the government, Christianity essentially had changed the moral fabric of the entire Roman Empire by love, not because of partnership with the government, but in spite of lack of partnership with the government. And so that should be heartening to maybe Christians in the West who feel like we're losing ground in what people have called the culture wars. Maybe there never were supposed to be culture wars in the first place. Maybe when we think about wars, we're thinking more like Peter did when he sliced Malchus's ear off in the garden, and then Jesus rebuked him and restored the man's ear. Or when the disciples got upset with the Samaritans and said, Lord, let's call fire down on them. Let's show them who's boss. And Jesus rebuked them for having that thought. And, maybe it's time to return to, taking the lead of love that Christ has demonstrated for us. And maybe we'll make a bigger difference that way. Who knows?
Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. Like, what does it mean to be a gentle person, and how can we transform from kind of like what we see in our world now, and as you say, sort of this culture war concept, to, I think probably is close to what you talk about in your book, A Gentle Answer, Our Secret Weapon in an Age of Us Against Them. You highlight like this threefold process of transformation towards this gentle Christ-like spirit. And maybe you could just talk to those things, those three things, as sort of, ways that we can see ourselves entering into this transformative process, where, in 300 years, we can see us out loving to the point where we see culture transformed.
Yeah, so I assume you're talking about the first three chapters of A Gentle Answer, which is it's my latest book project. Thanks for drawing attention to that. And my position and thought process in A Gentle Answer is, long before we start thinking about how we become gentle people, we've got to be well grounded in the gentleness of Christ toward us. If those among your listeners who are Christians who read the Bible, probably no doubt familiar with the 7 I am statements that Jesus makes in John's gospel. I'm the bread of life, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, I'm the gate, I'm the vine, I'm the resurrection and the life. Well, he made an 8th I am statement in Matthew's gospel when he said, I am gentle and humble in heart. And he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. 17 chapters before the Great Commission. 17 full chapters before he says, go and do for me. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And what that looks like, at least according to the 3 chapters of A Gentle Answer, is that, chapter 1 talks about how Jesus befriends the sinner in us. That's where I talk about his pursuit of a man named Zacchaeus, who was not only despised by society, he also had a lot of self-loathing and self-doubt. And Jesus, through love and pursuit of friendship with Zacchaeus, reversed all of those verdicts and gave Zacchaeus a new life. And Zacchaeus became the best man he'd ever been because of his encounter with the love of Christ. And then in chapter 2, I talk about how Jesus reforms the Pharisee in us. We all wrestle with this reality in the human heart called self-righteousness, where we trust in ourselves that we're righteous and look down on others with contempt, like it says in Luke 18:9. I think we see a lot of that in Western culture right now, especially in American Western culture, canceling others and, gotcha moments on Twitter and call out culture and us against them and outrage. It's just everywhere, at least in the States. I'm not sure how deeply it's affecting Canada, but it's rough here. And Jesus demonstrates a different way. He says the hard truths, but always with a desire to win the person. And so he attacks problems without attacking people. And then chapter 3 is about how he disarms the cynic in us. And that's where I engage a little bit with his dialogue with one of his disciples named Nathaniel, who is suspicious. Nathaniel is the one who famously said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And just was a little bit snarky, to say the least, regarding Jesus. And we see how, gently Christ engaged him. And of course, he became a follower of Christ as well through that. But the whole point is we can't get to the fruit of the Spirit if we bypass Jesus. We have to go through Jesus to get to virtue. You can't. It's like C.S. Lewis said, aim at heaven and you'll get earth thrown in, aim at earth and you'll get neither. Aim at Jesus and you'll get the fruit of the Spirit thrown in, but if you aim at the fruit of the Spirit, you'll get neither. Right? We can't become good on our own. We don't have the strength, we don't have the moral capacity to live up to the fruit of the Spirit in the love chapter unless we go through Christ. We catch what Christ has by being with him and by being close to him. That's kind of the Tim Keller effect I was talking about. You want to become the best version of you, then read the Bible every single day of your life for several decades, and be a praying person every single day of your life for several decades. Learn to apologize, learn to forgive every day of your life for several decades, and you'll grow. You'll grow as you draw near to Christ in those things.
Yeah, wow, beautifully put. So much. That's almost like a rich little like mini sermon, like just that question right there. But thank you, Scott. I wonder if we could pivot a little bit in thinking about some of those concepts we've just talked about together, but then what it can look like to be agents of redemption and restoration with some of those realities in mind, in navigating some of the potholes I think that culture is navigating with regards to the church or even people in their personal lives of faith. And maybe to start that off, I know that a lot has taken place in recent years that's left people both inside the church and outside the church sometimes disillusioned with followers of Jesus, disillusioned with Christian spiritual leaders. And so one of the real negative fallouts of that is then people choosing to become part of the duns or the nuns, as we call them, people who are done with church or have no identity with a faith system. And so I wondered, would you be able to speak to those individuals who maybe have been disappointed with spiritual leaders or Christians, and how can they both pursue healing in their personal lives? But also then with that, how can someone who's a Christ follower come alongside someone who feels kind of disillusioned with the church and invite them again back into that place of focusing on Jesus?
Yeah, that's a great question. A very important question for our time, especially as it seems like, every month, major, well-known, Christian representative of Christianity ends up, being revealed as living a double life or having, some kind of moral inconsistency or failure in their life, and it's happened very recently as well, and it's disheartening, to say the least, and I think the only answer that I can give to that is it makes perfect sense why somebody would have pause about Christianity and about becoming a Christian or getting involved with Christianity when they see people who identify themselves as Christians behaving in hurtful, even abusive ways. So that's first, is to legitimize and affirm the pause that people have. But I also, and this doesn't negate what I just said, this comes alongside what I just said. I also, feel it's important for Christians to help our concerned friends understand what makes Christianity different than any other religion. And that is that you have to be a hypocrite in order to be a Christian. And what I mean by that is you have to acknowledge that you do not live consistently with what you say you believe. That's the very first thing that a Christian must own up to in order to become a Christian, is I have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And I do so every day, and I will continue to do so every day until the day I die, because I am a person who is not yet complete. I am a person with inconsistent motives. I am a person who, even when I want to do good and be good, there are things about me and inside of me that that inhibit me from being as good as even I would like to be. And the Bible affirms this. And the Bible gives us several examples. Some of the greatest, people of faith that we know from the Bible also had seasons of moral failure. King David committed adultery and murder. And as he did so, he committed the abuse of power. He abused his power. It says that he saw Bathsheba, another man's wife. He sent for her and he took her. He used his power as king to take another man's wife. And half of the Psalms that he wrote before that incident. And roughly half the Psalms that he wrote after that incident. We've got Peter, who has moments of cowardice, moments of xenophobia and racism. We even have an occasion where Peter denied Jesus Christ just like Judas did, as Christ was headed toward his death on the cross. We could look at people like Abraham, who put his wife in very dangerous position in order to protect himself. Mm-hmm. And then his son Isaac did the same. And then Isaac's son Jacob, who became the father of Israel, was a deceiver. He was a deceitful man. You could go on and on and on. These are the people that God used to give us the Bible and to point us to Jesus. The only person in the Bible who is unstained is Jesus himself. And so what I also want to say to legitimate concerns about Christian hypocrisy is that our hypocrisy does not negate our faith, it actually establishes it. Because our faith says that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. And Christ also said, it's not the righteous that I came to help, but sinners, that I came to call to repentance. It's not the healthy, but the sick that I came for. And so everybody's got to decide, does my self-awareness put me in the category of sinners and sufferers? Or is my self-awareness put me in the category of those who don't sin and those who don't suffer to the degree that they need help outside of themselves? Because if we do, then I'm a hypocrite too, because I'm not telling the truth to you or to myself, let alone to God. If I'm gonna say that I'm morally superior and I don't have sin in my life and I don't have hypocrisy in my life. Everybody has hypocrisy in their lives. The difference is that in order to be a Christian, you have to admit that. And ideally, what happens then is a Christian becomes the kind of hypocrite that everybody wants to be friends with. Right? There's three kinds of hypocrites. There's the smug, self-righteous one that's always looking down on people, holier than thou. Nobody wants to be around that person. There's the evil hypocrite who says they love God, but uses that as a mask to injure and exploit and do deceptive things and use religion and use God's name in order to do that. And we've seen some of that, sadly, in some of the more public stories recently, which is tragic and gross. But then there's a third kind of hypocrite we could call the humble hypocrite. And that's the person that starts every day saying, have mercy on me, God, a sinner. Help me be who I'm supposed to be. I can't do it myself. I can't be that person myself. And that ironically is the hypocrite everybody wants to be a friend with, right? We're all drawn to the person who's transparent and honest about their weakness and their failures, right? Who doesn't make excuses and who doesn't blame shift to other people, who doesn't act like they're superior to other people, but who owns their own stuff. So that's a long answer, but I'll shorten the answer to the second question you asked, which is how do Christians engage that person? I say, first of all, affirm the legitimacy of the concerns and do your very best to paint a different picture and to say, hey, I agree with you. I can't stand the idea of a Christian acting, especially publicly or privately in abusive ways, that demonstrate behavior that denies Christ instead of believes in him. And yet, I also have to admit, if I'm being honest, that I've got seeds of rage in my heart. I've got seeds of adultery in my heart. Maybe I haven't committed murder. Maybe I haven't committed adultery physically, but you know, what's in me, maybe I've got an acorn of rage that has potential to become an oak tree. You put me in the right set of circumstances and maybe that acorn grows, which forces me to my knees every day to pray to God to help that acorn not become anything more than something small. But you know, humility and acknowledgement without excuse making of the legitimacy of the concerns, I think, is where we start. But
yeah, no, that's amazing. In such a cool way. I think that's like a really great, clear, even like exposition of 1 John 1, where he talks about all these different types of people who deny that they have any darkness in them or deny that they're in the darkness. And that person stays in the darkness and stays sort of bound by their sin. But the person who confesses, God is faithful and just to forgive. And that requires us knowing that we are sinners. That requires us knowing that we are that like hypocrite type person.
That's right.
Who needs to confess. That's really helpful.
That's right.
Thanks. Now this next question is not a gotcha moment, so please like be free from that. But yeah, we were wondering if maybe there's a time in your life, and it could be a failure, it could be a success, but is there something that just really sticks out to you that it's taught you and could maybe even teach some of our listeners a crucial lesson about following Jesus, whether a success or a failure that you feel would be a beneficial lesson for following Jesus?
Yeah, I would say my most regrettable mistake in life was that I started later than I did getting really serious about my faith. I would say one of my biggest regrets in life was not paying attention to what it says in Ecclesiastes when the writer says, remember your creator in the days that you are young. Because the earlier you start, just the richer your life in Christ is going to be. And I feel like I wasted some potentially really fruitful years by not getting serious about my faith. And it took me until I was done with college and had done a bunch of things I look back on in college that I now regret and wish I hadn't been part of, and the same with high school. And so, yeah, I wish I would have started following Christ earlier. And I'm sure that when I'm, 10 years older than I am right now, I'll say about my present self, I wish I wasn't such an idiot, when I was 10 years ago. So it's all relative, I guess. And God uses it all and he works through it all. But yeah. And probably too, just as a pastor, and this isn't just for pastors, this is for anybody who's driven, motivated, focused, kind of young professional. I wish that I would have taken myself less seriously in my work younger, when my kids were younger, because I feel like I took a lot of time away from them that really belonged to them in their younger years. It's not that I was a neglectful father or never spent any time with my kids. I did, but oftentimes I would give them myself at my most tired, spent moments, rather than reserving some of those best, most energized, focused hours for them in their younger years. So if I could go back in time, I would hope I would think differently about how important my ministry is, because it's not. God doesn't need me to do great things. He doesn't. Yeah. Never has needed me to do that. And so,
Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate your vulnerability on that and your openness on that front. And maybe as we kind of approach the end of our conversation, when you talk about that place of wanting to sink your teeth into your faith at a younger age, and appreciating that, especially with both your teaching, but also your work as a writer, you've interacted with a lot of different resources that I'm sure have gone a long way to shape you and your perspectives and the way that you teach and coach others. I wonder, would you be able to recommend some resources to us, maybe specifically not just on following Jesus, but especially for those who are listening saying, you know what, I resonate with what Scott is saying. I want to be that humble hypocrite. I want to be somebody who's willing to learn from my mistakes and step forward and daily just say, I want to follow Jesus. And I want to do that in a culture that maybe increasingly says, like, whoa, careful about Christianity. That's dangerous. That's toxic. That's whatever you may say. So for those who want to be agents of life and love and light in the world, what are some of maybe the reading resources or websites or other things that you would say, hey, check this out?
So, I mean, I wrote A Gentle Answer, and also my first book, Jesus Outside the Lines, which is probably the book that, in addition to A Gentle Answer, has gotten, the most interest for that express purpose of what you just asked. But I would also point your listeners to the Ragamuffin Gospel by Brennan Manning, Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. Those are two books that, if you really want to immerse yourself in the implications of what it means to be loved by God, those two books are really formative ones. But really, I'm honestly, you guys, I'm not just being cliche. I really do think that learning how to read the Bible every day, and there are all kinds of resources to help you do that, including your pastors, right, who are leading this podcast. Learn how to read the Bible well and do it every single day of your life. I think that's going to be your biggest win, is to do that, and to realize that as you're reading the Bible and you get through books that are harder to understand, like Leviticus and Revelation, just because it's hard for you to understand doesn't mean God's not up to something in your life as you're engaging with it. Remember, it was the Word of God that put the galaxies into existence. And he's given us words from himself. The same creator's words are there in the 66 books of the Old and New Testament. And I'm just a big Bible reading fan, you guys. And anything that gets in the way of you reading the Bible, like read the Bible before you read books about the Bible, like books I've written, right? If given the choice between reading my books and reading the Bible, read the Bible. And read it 10 times before you read one of my books, is another thing I would say. Nothing like a direct encounter.
That's for sure.
With God. So.
Amen to that. Well, we're going to try to get you to point once again to yourself. Our apologies. Where can people learn more about you and what you do?
They can just go to my website, which is scottsauls.com. You spell my last name, S-A-U-L-S. So SCOTTSAULS.com. There you can sign up for my weekly blog. There's information on the church that I serve in Nashville. There's information about the books that I've written and sermons and everything. So that's kind of the one-stop place for all the stuff that I'm involved with.
Fantastic.
Beautiful. Right on. Well, Scott, this has been a rich time to talk together, to learn from you, to sound you out on some important things. So thank you so much for what you shared and your insights with us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.